Well, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to this latest edition of the WIRES webinar series that we've been having, and we're pleased to have today as our guest speaker, Janet Sena, the Senior Vice President of External Affairs for NERC. And a little background on Janet. She's been with NERC since 2010. She has an extensive background in federal and state energy and environmental policy issues. Before she came to NERC, she served as the VP for External Affairs for Tampa Electric Company. Before that, she headed up state government affairs for Edison Mission Energy. She also did work prior to that for energy clients at the DC law firm of Skadden Arps. And she has extensive experience up on Capitol Hill as well, having worked on the staff for both Senators Robert Dole and Richard Lugar. And the list keeps going on, but I'm not gonna go back any further than that. Suffice it to say, Janet's been involved in the industry for a good solid period of time. She knows a lot, and we're really excited and anxious to hear what she has to tell us from the NERC perspective about what some of the cutting issues are going on right now on reliability. I'm also going to mention to all the attendees that you have the opportunity to submit questions through the question function, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen for the GoToWebinar control panel. If you click on that and you submit a question, it'll come to me, and then I can raise it up with Janet as we get more into the discussion portion. But Janet's going to first go through and give an overview on some of the reliability issues from the NERC perspective before we get to any of that. So with that, Janet, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take it away.
Great. Larry, thank you so much for that introduction, which just proves I'm old. But I really appreciate your invitation to be a part of your meeting today. I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Larry, for all your work at WIRES. You have worked to engage with NERC to keep us informed of your priorities. We've talked a lot about our shared commitment on reliability matters. So I just really appreciate this opportunity and thank you for making it possible. As always, today's comments are my own. They don't represent views of NERC or the NERC board. But I think I wanted to take the opportunity to share with you a lot of which we already know. Your group is very engaged and aware of the issues, but I want to bring to light a few things from NERC's perspective that we're really focused on. This past year and a half of dealing with the pandemic, extreme weather, cybersecurity, you name it, has been, to say at the least, challenging. At the same time, we have learned at NERC, I think, of the incredible value that there is to our mission. Our partnerships with government, with our state policymakers, with our industry stakeholders, have just reinforced the importance of reliability, resilience, and security of the North American grid to everyone, and especially the general public. This type of partnership really typifies NERC's unique role. We're not a trade association. We're a nonprofit, self-regulatory organization with a North American footprint. We have this incredible space as an independent voice for reliability and for security matters. As you said, I've been with NERC for 11 years, hard to believe. I've seen quite a maturation of our role in both reliability and, of course, the explosion that we've had in cyber. And, of course, the hits keep coming. The challenges facing the industry are daunting. While the pandemic taught us and continues to teach us how to manage change, the changing resource mix, cybersecurity, and extreme weather have been our top priorities. These three risks were identified in our recently released Reliability Risk Report. That report is a forward-looking view of imminent and projected risk to the bulk power system. The report also identified critical infrastructure interdependencies, such as the ability to deliver natural gas to generating units. As variable resources continue to replace other generation sources, natural gas is going to remain essential to reliability. However, as we all know, the natural gas system was not built nor regulated with electric reliability in mind. So we need to continue to drive better coordination, planning, and operations between the electric and gas industry. Among the recommendations in the report really focuses on the challenges that the industry is undergoing and has to really calls for a look at how we change the look at traditional methods of long-term planning, operational planning, and real-time operations. The report emphasizes that it's imperative to understand and plan for the changing operational characteristics of the grid. I think WIRES did a study with Brattle a while ago, and in that report, it said that regional grid planners and managers are struggling to stay ahead of these changes, and that remains true. Operators and planners are having to rethink how they operate the system. They are spending every waking hour to ensure the stability of the system, and most of the time, they've been pretty successful at doing that. But this fuel mix is continuing to transform. It's increasingly we are seeing more and more amounts of weather-dependent generation like solar and wind, and they require more supplemental and flexible resources to help balance supply and demand. The grid of the future can provide operational flexibility and support clean energy policy goals, but some important steps need to happen along the way. More transmission, more pipelines, energy storage, other balancing resources like hydrogen can and will be game changers. However, we have to appreciate the gap that currently exists, the scale we need to obtain in order to assure reliability of the system. The February event in Texas was a stark reminder, and the Mid-South, I should say, was a stark reminder that more and more the system becomes complex, greater risks to reliability occur. None of this should be interpreted as an argument against the transition. The transition is happening. We've been through transitions before, and we'll get through this transition. But it's just a reinforcement of the message that managing this pace of change is a central challenge to reliability. All of this would be more than enough to spend our time on if we didn't have to throw cybersecurity into the mix. But the number of compromises we've seen since SolarWinds has only continued to increase. All of this just reminds us of how determined our adversaries are. Fortunately, to date, no outages or threats to the bulk power system have occurred, but we have to remain vigilant. I think NERC's registered entities benefit greatly from having mandatory cyber standards in their place. We have to plan and address the security of our systems just as we think about the operation and maintenance and recovery of our assets. It's important to remember cybersecurity standards provide a foundation for security. Probably some of you have heard me say this before. Not every vulnerability needs a standard. Cybersecurity is fast acting. The pace of it requires quick exchange of information. And it is the combination of the foundation of our standards coupled with the information sharing capabilities of the EISAC that handles that fast acting nature of cyber by communicating with the industry in North America through a secure portal. I continue to brag that the ISAC remains the only organization with a complete look at the North American grid. It's the only organization that can get information from Montreal, from Portland, Oregon, and from Houston, Texas, and be able to compare those and look at it and get information to all those entities instantaneously about what's going on. The partnerships that we've established with the ISAC within the US and within Canada continue to grow and strengthen. Manny Cancel is our new CEO of the ISAC. If you haven't met him, I encourage you to do so. He comes to us from industry as a former Chief Information Security Officer, really knows the challenges and has taken the ISAC to a whole new level. I'll switch gears a minute because our primary efforts, and probably what a lot of people's minds are on, is on cold weather. You're going to hear some high-level summaries from the joint FERC-NERC inquiry at the FERC Commission meeting next week. No, I'm not going to spoil the surprise of what's in that, but encourage you all to tune in for that. The final report will be out later in the year, but I think you've heard both Chairman Glick and my boss, Jim Robb, talk about their focus on this and the focus on the recommendations from that report. At the same time, we've also had some other things moving along. FERC recently approved our cold weather standard. They did that in 60 days. That's one of the fastest times FERC has ever responded. We have a level 2 alert going out to industry to request additional information on their plans for the upcoming winter season. We're doing webinars, talking a lot about what modifications have been put in place. And in light of the study, along with other efforts, we'll continue to examine the reliability standards to determine if other modifications to those standards are needed, probably primarily in the planning area. I want to take an opportunity as well to highlight our assessments. I continue to believe that these assessments are truly valuable resources. And I want to assure all of you, when I first came to NERC, I made sure there was an executive summary included. I know that all of you are very busy, so we're trying to make sure that these can be usable for you, quick references, but there's really good information in these assessments. They are independent technical analysis that provide the basis for a lot of the enhancements that we do to our standards. They provide insight to where we see the system straining. We've consistently called out 3 areas in the US. We've called out the West, we've called out Texas, and the Northeast. And we've already seen wobbles on the systems in 2 of those areas, California in 2020, where the heat wave led to load shedding, and the Texas Mid-South event I've already mentioned earlier this year. I think these assessments are actually becoming quite prescient. In 2021, the Winter Reliability Assessment included a map depicting areas in North America where there was a heightened reliability risk due to extreme weather. And yes, it showed Texas and the Mid-South, and we saw those impacts. The 2021 summer assessment identified unusually hot weather, late summer wildfire season, and worsening drought in the Western United States. And in one of my favorite quotes, the economist noted this assessment and said, the boffins got it right. Okay, I had to look up what boffins meant. It means technical experts, but they were referring to our assessment and the work that we had done. In addition to these seasonal assessments, which kind of take a look and say, hey, here's what's going to happen, we also take a look back. And we just issued our 2021 State of Reliability Report, looking back at the year of 2020. And several of our State of Reliability reports have shown the bulk power system does pretty well. And that was also true of 2020. It did remain very reliable. There were operated initiated load shedding events that occurred in 2020. Those were impacts due to Hurricane Laura, California heat wave, and the October ice storm in Texas. But absent those events, the metrics performance would have been on par with previous years. Now, of course, there's supply chain disruptions that continue to increase in the threat landscape and the urgency of cybersecurity risk responses I've discussed. But the State of Reliability also made some points on transmission. And so I wanted, because of my audience here today with Wire, spend a little bit of time on that, knowing that most of you probably already know all this. But the reports showed that collectively, weather events and wildfires caused most of the transmission outages with greater frequency than in prior years. At the same time, outages due to human error and equipment failure showed continued improvement, and that was good news. This report, like other assessments, have continued to call out for the need for more transmission. We've got to have more transmission to access diverse resources as this fuel mix continues to transition. It is essential to unlocking the renewables. The report reaffirmed additional messages. Again, more transmission and natural gas infrastructure required to improve resilience of the grid. The electric transmission investment must keep pace with the increase in utility scale wind and solar resources, which are generally located outside of major load centers. And transmission investments can also strengthen the ability to wheel power to different load centers, improving resilience through redundancy. So in conclusion, I've listed a lot of challenges. They're all highly complex, and they're going to require a lot of incredible technical expertise to resolve. They're also going to require a lot of significant coordination between policymakers and stakeholders. We have worked continuously to develop this with our industry partners, with FERC, with DOE, with our partners in Canada. And because I'm in external affairs, this is of course very near and dear to my heart. The communication and getting our messages out is extremely important. We've increased our outreach to NERC. We've met with the electricity committees, the gas committees, the cybersecurity committees. We've begun a state outreach effort with our regions to take our assessments and get them in the hands of state regulators. Again, to be a resource of information on the technical aspects of reliability, and this has proven to be very positive. Of course, my boss, Jim Robb, continues to get out there and meet with industry groups, including associations like NERC and CAMPUT in Canada, as well as our US and Canadian government partners. And also forums like this. This helps raise awareness of the tremendous amount of effort that is underway to maintain the reliability and the security of the system. There's no doubt that I'm a big believer that this model that we have at NERC, while unique, is also incredibly valuable. Where else do you get people, the technical experts around the table, to assess the risk, to write the standards, to get them implemented and get them enforced, all in a transparent manner. The NERC standards provide a baseline, but it's the combination of everything we do, whether it's guidelines, the information sharing, the assessments of risk, that collectively provide stakeholders and policymakers with the information that they need to address the challenges. NERC is working to address all these challenges that I've described, but probably for me, it has reinforced a message that I did not have when I first started working here. It was really how reliability, resilience, and security of the grid are so intricately linked. They are probably forever linked. So NERC has positioned itself well to facilitate addressing these issues. As I mentioned, this transition we're going forward through is exciting. There's a lot of opportunities as well as the challenges. And I fully believe we've been through transitions before. I'm old, I've seen it. We're going to get through this one. But the role of NERC, and I encourage all of you to reach out to us, is one that is there for you to be a resource, to work with you, to talk through these issues, because we all share the same commitment for reliability and security of the North American system. So Larry, with that, that concludes my remarks, and happy to turn it back over to you.
Well, great, Janet. Thank you very much. Always appreciate your efforts on trying to educate both the industry and others on some of these really complicated and technical, but vitally important issues that we're facing with the grid and reliability. And you're certainly preaching to the choir when you get into the talk about the needs for more transmission as a component of trying to meet the reliability needs. And we're right there with you on that. I just want to remind folks who are attending to please feel free to submit some questions for Janet. She's very open to addressing any concerns or questions people have, and I'm starting to get some of them in. But I'm going to start off with some of my own because I've got a few as well. And you hit on so many topics that I actually was thinking I wanted to explore a little bit more with you. But one of them right off the bat, and you hit on this several times, is this issue we are starting to see with increasing frequency and increasing ferocity, I think, of extreme weather events and the variety of them that we're seeing, whether you're talking about the wildfire issues out in the West, the hurricane issues in the Gulf region, or the Eastern Seaboard, and then just some of these extreme cold weather events that we're seeing in areas we don't expect it as much, like Texas, but even in areas where you do expect it coming in and hitting hard on the system. So across the board, just seems like there's an increase in these. And you've talked a little bit about some of the NERC and FERC actions to try to address it. I guess I'm curious, can you elaborate a little bit more on any changes that have occurred with respect to standards to try to address these extreme weather events? And separate from that, do you see additional needs down the road on standards related to trying to address these as we keep seeing them over and over again?
Yeah, I think the standards themselves already require a lot within planning. They truly require industry to be aware, and this industry is one of the best at preparing for and being aware of what they need to do. But having said that, I think, as I mentioned, what we're really seeing with a lot of these changes, it's really challenging the paradigms that we've had to deal with before. So the planning that we've had to do in the past, the operations that we've dealt to, we've even seen resilience measures taken. NERC can't order people to build things or to develop things, so we really strengthen it through the planning procedures. But it really is challenging the system as to what to build to, from a resilience point of view. And I do think that the standards have helped this industry prepare for that more so than most. But there's much more that we're going to have to do. And I think the joint inquiry is going to provide some foundation for us to go forward. But a lot of things we discover through events analysis, we discover through looking at the events that happened, and then we make recommendations from those events for further things to take place. We've done a lot on inverter-based resources. So there's just a lot of different areas that we've moved forward on. But to your point, I do feel like we're just at the beginning of discovering where some of these challenges of how we really can affect it.
Yeah, the Texas situation in particular did have an element of deja vu all over again, given,
Yeah.
back I think it was 2012 when we had the Southwest outages related to the cold snap down there. And FERC and NERC worked together on trying to address those issues at that time. And I know a report came out, a lot of which was just was more in the form of suggestions or recommendations. Do you have optimism that this time around we're going to see more actual concrete actions taken?
Yeah, I do. I think like everything you learn from that. And I'd also remind you that those guidelines, there were a lot of people who did follow them. There were a lot of people who did put things into place that were not impacted as much. But I do think both Chairman Glick and my boss have said we're talking about actions we're solidly going to take, and that's going to include relooking at the standards. So I do think there's quite a recognition at that of the need to do that.
Yeah, and and then looking at like the recent issues down in Louisiana with Hurricane Ida, that raised questions for some people. It was different interviews I had where people were asking, can you build a system that will withstand anything? Basically, is it even possible to do that? And part of that too was a question about undergrounding, and I don't know if that's an issue that NERC has looked at or not in terms of some of the reliability issues associated with those outages.
Yeah, no, it's not, again, from again, we can't specify a specific technique or technology to be pursued, but we certainly always factor in resilience. My experience with undergrounding came more from my experience when I worked at Tampa Electric in Florida, and we went through 5 hurricanes in 1 year. So there's and I think I saw your comments on that, and just your bigger picture point is there are going to be a lot of policymakers that are going to have to make some very difficult decisions about how we can fund and how we can go forward on this. And factoring in reliability into those considerations, I think, has been NERC's primary goal. But from a technical expertise basis and providing that information as a resource to them. It's not an easy answer, but I do think that they're, just providing that independent assessment can give them a foundation to go forward and make those decisions on from that regard.
Yeah, great. I want to shift to another factor that's playing into this too, which is the increasing electrification that we're seeing going on in the economy. And that raises two aspects. One is the potential for increasing demand, and then second, just increasing the needs associated with the reliability of the system in order to meet the increasing electrification. Is that something, is this greater electrification movement a factor that NERC looks at in its reliability assessments at all?
I think what we looked at is DERs, and we take a look at what's actually going on in the system. I'm not an engineer, so I'm reflecting comments that I hear. But of course, the concern we have, our jurisdiction is a bulk power system. But so much of this is occurring on the distribution system and in arenas that we may not have visibility into. And so how do we work to improve that sharing of that information? How do we make sure operators and planners can see what they need to see in that regard? We have done some work on that. There's more work to be done, of course, but again, it's exciting. There's opportunities there. There's some great things to pursue. But from our perspective, it's more about that is a jurisdiction we don't have. So how do we facilitate communication and work with that structure? And that's why our outreach to NERC and our work with the states is an important part of that conversation.
Yeah, we appreciate that. I know in particular that education effort on behalf of NERC with the states, I think, is really helpful for those of us who are working on the transmission issues, because I think it helps bring up their level of understanding of some of where we're coming from as well. So definitely appreciate the efforts for NERC's engagement on state issues with NERC and individual commissions.
Good.
I want to shift gears again to another topic, and this one is a little bit pulling on my own background and experience, and that is focusing on some of the compliance issues that have been going, that NERC has been seeing, and just curious as to whether, you know, as NERC is working through the various, you know, notices of penalty and things of that nature, are there any particular trends from a compliance standpoint that you think have been emerging in recent years, or anything in particular that you're seeing, NERC seeing from a compliance standpoint that would be helpful for people in the industry to know about?
Well, I think one of the more interesting facts for me is that there's a high majority of violations that are self-reported by industry. And I think that shows industry leaning in, a real recognition of the value of the model and the fact that, you know, we all care about risk, we all care about the reliability to the system, and the goal is to focus in on, well, while we'd love to have no violations, right? That would be our ultimate goal. But when there are, to address them and to figure out the core, you know, crux of the problem. I think what we've seen more, and this is not unusual, but cyber continues to be, the cyber standards continue to be a challenge. And that challenge is understood because they're new. You have a lot of operators that are very small. You have operators that are large. And so there's quite a vast difference of capabilities of how to manage cyber. So there's a lot of work being done with various groups, and DOE is helping on this, of how we can move forward on that in a way that works for everyone. We've had great success with the ISAC with a program called CRISP, which has nothing to do with our standards, but has everything to do with monitoring. And so there are a lot of tools outside of compliance that are contributing to addressing cybersecurity. But I think that's probably, you know, we always get a question about, oh, well, you know, because we report this at our board meetings, you know, we always get updates on where violations are. And, you know, people see there's some violations within cyber, and that's like, well, yeah, they're learning. They're getting to know it. But I remind everybody, we still have not seen an impact to the bulk power system. Knock on wood, these cyber supply chain issues that we've seen have been very aggressive. But the system has performed well, and we think there are some things that we do within the standards that actually, you know, help and assist with that.
I want to pull a little bit from your experience up on Capitol Hill. There's so much going on right now in the electricity and the transmission realm. I'm just curious whether you foresee anything from a legislative standpoint, either in the infrastructure bill or maybe something later coming down the road that could impact reliability. Curious as to what you're seeing.
Well, my first answer is always don't do no harm, right? Let's make sure we don't get anything that's going to do any harm. But we are very fortunate. The ERO is mentioned in several pieces of the energy subdivision of the infrastructure bill, just pulling us in on consulting with a lot of the programs. And so that recognition of our role, working with FERC, working with DOE on those initiatives is appreciated. I think that to me, it's going to be fascinating to watch, because if there are opportunities, as we've said, to contribute to the conversation where we can take some steps forward on some of these issues, I think that's exciting. At the same time, from our world, we feel like we have the authority that we need to be able to do what we need to do within the reliability space. So we feel that, believe it or not, EPACT, you know, did a pretty good job of giving us that flexibility to recognize cyber at that point. You and I were there probably when it was being developed. I think is a real credit to that. So I think cybersecurity is probably where in the future I see more activity, but a recognition of the role of the ISAC and the importance that role plays, the partnership we have with the government, and the unique role that we have with North America. And I'll come back to that. We all know electrons don't stop at the border. So we have this unusual footprint because of that. And that just puts us in a very important space when we're dealing with all these issues. So I don't see the legislative arena as being too active, but that may be more of a wish than a reality.
Right. Well, and I want to loop back because you did touch on this, but I did get a specific question from someone about, they said after in light of the Texas freeze, and does NERC need any additional authority to apply closer scrutiny to whether assessments or warnings are heeded? And you seem to indicate you thought NERC had the authority it needed, but I just wanted to get it in that particular context of whether you think there's anything further that would be helpful for NERC.
Yeah, I think that I think there are a couple of issues that policymakers are going to have to decide on, and my boss pointed this out when he testified on the Hill earlier in the year. Natural gas continues to be just a really critical part of electricity more and more, and as I mentioned, it really wasn't developed for that. We don't have authority over natural gas. We don't necessarily want authority over natural gas, but the electric gas coordination and how we approach that and that conversation is only going to become more important. I think Chairman Glick also indicated, they've got some footprints there as well at FERC, but this continual focus on the role of natural gas and how it plays, I think especially in the cybersecurity arena, is something we were very pleased to see them take steps forward to develop some standards on cybersecurity within TSA. So it's not a jurisdictional issue for much as it is just how we can help, how we can contribute, how we just all depend on it. So we've got to make sure those forums are there for that conversation. I don't see barriers to that require a legislative solution, but we do think the regulatory structure is something that has to be taken into consideration as we look forward to this. It doesn't, like I said, my boss just pointed that out to Congress, just saying, keep that in mind. But I think the structures in place can manage it. We just have to be focused on it.
Well, you mentioned cybersecurity a couple of times, and I wanted to loop to that just because I do have a specific question that someone asked about that as well. And that has to go. That question goes to whether NERC has any awareness or concerns about cybersecurity threats from imports, imported parts or imported transformers, particularly those coming in from China. And I'm just curious as to whether there's anything there from a NERC perspective.
Yeah, I think that we, through the ISAC, worked with the government to identify and issue alerts associated with, some things that were identified through executive orders and now through, current, like I think the DOE RFI that went out associated with that. So we are definitely part of the communication with our government partners on addressing those issues. As far as insight, I'm not privy to that as far as awareness, so I don't have my clearances, so I wouldn't be someone who could comment on that. But we do work with the partners through the ISAC of getting that type of information and awareness out. That has been quite a focus of the administration.
Yeah, another topic you touched on too was the changing energy resource mix and all the challenges that poses to the grid and to system reliability. What's from NERC's perspective, what are some of the challenges associated with that, particularly if you're looking at a pretty short timeline for trying to meet various goals, such as even like 15 years from now? Is that too fast a pace for trying to keep up with the reliability, or just talk somewhat about the challenges posed with that type of a timeline, the changes involved there, and try to keep the grid reliable?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, that managing that pace is our biggest challenge. And we've seen, wobbles on the system where we pointed out there are some areas where systems are really stressed from this. I think raising awareness of that, and our role with that, if you take California and you look at some of the things that occurred out west to address some of those issues, I think there are our role in raising that awareness, but then recognizing that some of the answers are within the jurisdiction of the states to be able to address that is a very important part of our role. At the same time, we have a very important capability of looking at planning and looking at, how people plan for these things, what they have to look at, what they have to take into consideration. And I think that's where a lot of our focus has been in the past as we look to this upcoming winter and winter preparation. As I said, we we got the cold standard approved. We've asked for, what their plans are. We have the capability through our alerts of gathering information and being aware of that. So I think it's that role that we can continue to play and make people aware. I think as long as people are aware of where those sensitivities are, quite honestly, this industry does a pretty good job every day of keeping it together and making it work. So as we said, we've had some wobbles, we've seen that, but there have been some great success stories where they have managed it. I just think you have to be aware of where those limitations are, transmission being one of them, that needs to be addressed. And I think there's a recognition of that and a desire to do that. And I think when we see those being built, and getting, actually being done, that's going to be a real important first step. But there's a lot of different answers. It's just trying to figure out what's the right path, how to pay for it, which are kind of outside of our bailiwick. But I think we're very focused on, we'll get to the solution. We'll get there. We just want to make sure reliability is factored into those conversations, and collectively to date it has been.
Well, that's a similar line. I got a very specific question about a particular piece of legislation, and they're asking whether NERC has at any point looked at the Clean Energy Performance Program that's currently in Congress, and see whether there are any reliability impacts or concerns associated with that.
Yeah, we have not. We're obviously aware of it. It really goes to, funding, and the industry itself, I think, is very engaged upon that. But we have not taken a look at that specifically.
Is that typical? I mean, does NERC usually wait till further along in the process to look at legislation to see about those types of impacts, or? I don't know what your process is on that.
Yeah, it varies. Our first and foremost concern is on anything that would directly impact Section 215 and our scope of authority regarding that. If it is outside of our scope and it doesn't directly impact us, we have not normally pursued that, but we do have the ability for our industry, for our stakeholders, policymakers, or FERC, to call us into conversations and to look at those things. But we have not at this point on that particular topic.
And I got another question that came in, and this relates to your programming teaser that you offered related to the FERC meeting, and having some kind of an overview of the February outage efforts. And the question really was whether you have indicated or have any expectation of when that report ultimately would be released.
Well, I encourage everybody to turn on the 23rd, because I think you're going to get a lot of high-level overviews that's going to give you a lot of insight into the report. I think the report itself will be out by the end of the year, but I really think the 23rd is going to be very helpful as far as highlighting what the focus is and what the priority is. I think that it is September is a busy month for us, because not only do we have the 23rd at FERC, but we also have the Reliability Technical Conference on the 30th. And so we'll be very active at FERC, so stay tuned and tune in, I guess is the best way to say, because there'll be a lot of these topics that I'm talking about today that I know will be points of further conversation by people far more expert than me at these forums.
Great. I wanted to also follow up. We talked a little bit about electrification, and this question really ties it to some of the challenges specifically associated with winter and winter weather. And the question is that with electrification of heat and transportation and the challenges it poses for wintertime, can you comment at all on what the future reliability and resilience with likely winter peaking demand could be involved with that?
Well, I think it has been a real interesting conversation, what we've seen happening within peaking demands, right? Most people did everything they needed to do in the summer in order to prepare for the winter. Now all of a sudden the summer has become a very, very active, time for challenges. I think that, or did I say that backwards? Winter into summer. But long story short, I think that I look at electrification. I think there's a lot of great possibilities for that. And I think that I don't know that I can really comment on how I see that happening from a demand perspective. But I do see all of a sudden now what we used to plan for, what we used to take down maintenance for and get ready, I said it backwards, getting ready for the winter and going into the summer, all that's changed, right? We are seeing demands at different times. And I think that's creating a stress again for our operators and planners. And I continue to, look to our experts who work with them to figure out how we can start assessing that system in a new way. Some of the paradigms that we've been used, to dealing with are changing, and we're going to have to rethink some of that.
Well, I got an interesting question here too, and I'm curious about your perspective on this one myself. You've been at NERC for about 11 years, right? And during that time period, this focus is really on the NERC-FERC relationship. During that time period, you see significant changes in the leadership over time, both as the administrations change, but then even as chairmen change within the same administration. And the question really goes up to today, and whether from NERC's perspective, do you see any differences in approach from the current FERC commission under Chairman Glick versus the more recent ones with Chairman Chatterjee, very briefly with Chairman Danley? Just curious as to whether you've seen any shifts or changes from a reliability perspective as there have been those changes in leadership of late.
It's interesting because since my job is to make sure that those relationships are first and foremost taken care of and are a priority, I will tell you that I have always appreciated the fact that we have had an open door on the 11th floor at the commission. I have always worked to make sure that we stay in touch with all commissioners, that we make sure that they are very aware of the issues and the topics that we have. And I've really not seen a significant change as far as, their willingness to meet with us, their willingness to recognize us between the ones that you've mentioned as far as working on reliability and the focus on reliability. I think that's just been a shared opportunity. This is very selfish on my part. I'm old and I worked with Neil, I worked with Rich, so I know them very well. And that certainly has helped in that regard. But I will tell you that with every new commission, just as all of your members know, the opportunity to meet with them, and sometimes I think this gets overlooked, is really not always pursued to the level it should be. So reaching out to those individual offices, having that opportunity to really talk with them about, and share the expertise. We have a very unique relationship with FERC. And I will say that I believe that Chairman Glick has been very, very gracious at reaching out to us and making sure that, he wants the relationship between FERC and NERC to be a priority. And we've really appreciated that. And we've had great conversations with him and his staff in that regard. So I just will say it is a lot different than when I first started. That when I first came, we really didn't have to NERC, we really didn't have an established outreach and relationship. And I'm very proud of the fact that we now have many more regular meetings, many more outreach opportunities. And I think that we can always improve, we can always do better. But I do think we've been able to establish a pretty good rapport. Maybe I should ask the question of your audience. Do they think we're doing a good job? Let me know. We can always improve.
Well, I continue to get some questions that want to focus on the Texas situation and what had happened previously. So I've got one more I want to run by you, which is, this one says that one of the things that came out was ERCOT indicated that it was only a few minutes away from what might have been a system-wide cascading situation back in mid-February. And the question is, do you have any sense of, if that had happened, what would the recovery process have been like? How do we have any sense of how long it would have taken to get the system back online?
I can't speak for myself or the inquiry on that fact. I like probably a lot of you listened to the hearings in Texas where Bill Magnus did address that and indicated that they did get close and it would have been much worse. I think we've all been in situations where the efforts that are taken by a lot of our operators and planners on moments have made a difference in how the system gets managed, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a negative way. So I can't comment on the specific situation. The inquiry report, again, tune in. But I think we're all aware of situations where steps are taken at times that have made a big difference. You can go back to the outage of 2003 and take a look at that map and what happened there and the studies there. So there are always examples of that. I'm always awed by what is accomplished by this industry on a day-to-day basis and what they do to protect the system. And they don't want the system going dark. That's not what their goal is. So I'm always impressed by the focus that they have on that priority.
Yes, and we saw a lot of that through the mutual assistance efforts just down in Ida.
Oh yeah, completely on the resilience side.
Well, one question that came in also, we talked about the infrastructure bill, some other legislation. The question was, are you aware of any other legislative efforts up on the Hill that our members should be interested in or following that could be reliability related?
None come to mind, but I haven't looked at that. I've been so focused, like you have, on what the current levels of activity are. Nothing comes to mind that I'm aware of. I will always say I have an open door if there are issues that you guys become aware of. And Larry, you've always been good about doing this, that you think we need to be aware of. Let us know. But as I said, most of the time we get called in or our assessments are referred to. I've had occasion in the past where our assessments have been pointed to by people on both sides of an argument, right? And that's probably a pretty good place for us to be. We're kind of that independent assessor. And so, like I said, I never look for or hope that we don't have legislation that would change or challenge our scope. I want them to understand what we're doing and know that we're doing it well. But I am not aware of anything directly, but I'm sure there may be something out there. I just haven't looked at it.
Well, one of the things, and I haven't had a chance really to touch base with you on this one yet, but it's offshore wind and offshore transmission associated with supporting the development of offshore wind. I'm just curious, is this something that NERC looks into, the offshore transmission issues associated with integrating offshore wind? Is that something that gets factored into the assessments that NERC does in any way? Just curious as to what.
Larry, I'll have to take a look at that. Nothing comes to mind initially on that, but there could be. I'm just not personally aware of it. But anything associated with the interconnection to the bulk power system would draw it in. So it's similar to where we have large solar farms or large wind farms. Anything that collectively, has a nexus with the bulk power system would be in our footprint. But I haven't heard anything specifically about that.
Okay, yeah, I was curious. And then another thing I wanted to ask you about, because you touched on this right from the beginning when you started talking, which was the impact of the pandemic and the adjustments that we've all had to make in terms of how we do our work, including people in the utility industry. Thinking back to early on when utilities had to have staff come in and basically, be shut off from the rest of the world while they were operating systems. Looking back on that, and then in terms of where we are now, what have you seen as the biggest impacts from the pandemic on reliability related issues for the industry?
It's really interesting. We actually issued an assessment in 2010, I think, that was called High Impact, Low Frequency Events that looked at pandemics. And the impact that it talked about was the workforce. And so for me, when going through this, and this is separate from NERC so much, but what I think was the biggest impact for me were the challenges that our control rooms faced, the challenges that industry had to deal with how to deal with operations and having a group of workforce available to be in. I think it heightened actually something we said in that report, which is what happens if we lose or you have a large group of control center operators that become ill from COVID, right? What is the impact on that? What is your backup structure? How do you do that? So what I observed, this is not necessarily through NERC, but what you observed was seeing industry be extremely creative. We were able to be on, working with the ESCC, hear about how they, handled those issues, how they address those issues. But it stressed that we have really smart, intelligent technical expertise in this industry, but is also extremely valued. And it's also a recognition of how to protect that in a pandemic situation from a workforce capability. So to me, that's what I took away from it was how the industry worked through that, how we saw them address that. And fortunately, knock on wood, reliability did not miss a beat from that perspective. So, NERC itself went through, but I will tell you, we have a really big footprint. We have, 6 regions, our North American footprint. In some ways, this structure actually facilitated and increased productivity just from the fact that, we weren't traveling as much, right? We were spending more time dealing with the issues and being able to get on phone calls and do that. So, but that to me was the biggest takeaway I took, was just the impact to the workforce, the recognition of the expertise that you have and what steps you have to take to protect that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because isn't that pandemic workforce issue really part of a broader workforce issue for the industry in terms of long-term? Do we have enough trained people with the skills to help manage the system? And I'm just curious, are there reliability issues associated with that broader workforce issue?
Oh, sure, there are, and I think your members know that probably better than anyone from that perspective. So efforts that we work on outreach to technical universities to create a nexus and sharing of information, recruitment of talent. Cybersecurity is probably the most acute, just because there's such a limited knowledge and we're all competing with each other for that expertise. And so having that expertise and realizing sharing of that knowledge is extremely valuable and extremely important. So yes, a big concern, I think, for everyone. But like I said, at the same time, I think there's a broad awareness of it and the need to figure out ways to continue to encourage and develop expertise in these areas is something we all need to focus on.
Well, Janet, I'm looking at the clock and I'm always amazed at how fast these webinars seem to fly by. But before we let you go, I've got to ask you one more question. And in my mind, this may be the most important one of all. Okay. So it is, and it's probably one you get all the time, I would imagine. But what is the thing, or what are the things that keep NERC up at night?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the cybersecurity efforts, and again, I'm not as close to them as many people are, but I think that has just changed the conversation. It has lifted awareness of the system and the vulnerabilities of the system. That, from my perspective, is the challenge from a North American footprint point of view that I probably think more about. At the same time, I realize this infrastructure has more in place that protects it than many. So that gives me a lot of calm, knowing that there's as many people as there are that are focused on it. But I think it has so changed the paradigm of what we have to focus on And we don't, it was not something when I started out in this industry that was really on the radar screen. Something that has evolved at a pace, and like I mentioned, the aggressiveness of how determined our adversaries are in that industry. So I do worry about it, but I also think this industry through NERC has taken more steps, as I mentioned, from standards to the ISAC, to guidelines, to information sharing, to partnerships. So I feel very good about where we are, but we've got to stay on it.
Well, I know one of the things FERC's looked at is whether there should be incentives for cybersecurity measures taken. And I'm just curious, from a regulatory standpoint, you think that's something regulators should be looking at, trying to provide those initiatives or incentives for utilities?
I am very happy to leave that to FERC. Right? Very happy.
You're not going to bite on that one, huh?
They get on us all the time about scope, so I got to stay in my lane.
Great. Well, listen, Janet, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate hearing your perspective. Appreciate very much the work that you and NERC do in this area. It's of vital importance, critical to the American public. And thank you again, and really appreciate your taking the time to talk with us today.
Larry, thank you for the invitation. Really appreciate this opportunity. Thanks to you and all your members and what you do to help us ensure the reliability of the grid. Thanks.
Great. And with that, I think we'll call today's session a wrap. And thank you very much, Janet.
Bye.
Bye now.